On 10 May 1940. As dawn crept over London, Winston Churchill stood alone in his study, listening to the city breathe. Only hours earlier he had become Prime Minister, inheriting a war already going badly, and an empire staring into darkness. France was buckling under German armor. The Low Countries were collapsing by the day, and Britain stood exposed across the Channel. Yet the fear that gnawed deepest inside Churchill was not Hitler alone, but something more distant, more uncertain. Across the Atlantic, the United States watched cautiously, bound by isolationist laws, scarred by the memory of the last war. In those first terrible days of leadership, Churchill confided to his diary that without America, Britain's fate was a narrowing corridor. He knew the Royal Navy could starve Germany, slowly. He knew British factories could adapt under pressure, but time was the enemy. Privately he asked his closest advisors, in hushed rooms thick with smoke and weary faces, what Britain would do if America never came. Lord Halifax spoke cautiously of endurance, of empire resources stretched thin, in measured tones, while others avoided the question entirely. The words left unsaid carried more weight in that cramped room, because everyone present understood the arithmetic of power. Germany's factories outproduced Britain's. Its armies were blooded and confident in brutal campaigns, and its leader believed time favored him. Churchill spoke bravely in Parliament days later, promising blood and toil to steady morale, while privately fearing the silence from Washington. President Roosevelt sent messages of sympathy, not commitment, constrained by Congress, polls, and a divided nation. To Churchill this was the most dangerous waiting of all, because bombs could be faced by courage, but indifference could not. As summer approached and invasion rumors spread, British leaders whispered their fears, between meetings and sleepless nights. If America stayed out, they wondered quietly, could the island endure, or would history close its door? That question hovered unanswered over Britain, shaping every decision made in May. Under constant threat, and hardening every resolve, the war had only begun for Churchill. And already he was fighting on two fronts, one visible, one silent. By 18 June 1940, the news from France was catastrophic, and the shock rippled through every corridor of Whitehall. Paris had fallen, the French government was fleeing south, and Britain suddenly stood alone against a continent subdued by force. Churchill gathered his war cabinet in the cabinet room, faces drawn tight, voices low, as maps were spread across the polished table. Lord Halifax raised the question few wished to confront, whether Britain should explore terms if America remained distant and silent. He argued carefully, citing exhaustion, losses, and the grim reality of fighting Germany without allies, across air and sea. Churchill listened, fingers clenched around a cigar, weighing words that might decide the survival of the nation. In private notes he wrote that surrender would mean chains, not peace, and that Britain must fight on, America or not. Yet even he acknowledged the danger, because without American industry, shipping, and credit, the margin for survival was razor thin. Across the Atlantic, Roosevelt followed events closely, sympathetic to Britain's plight, but constrained by neutrality acts and hostile lawmakers. British diplomats in Washington sent anxious cables home, describing isolationist rallies, hostile newspapers, and senators warning against entanglement. Ambassador Lord Lothian reported that public opinion was shifting slowly, but far too slowly for Britain's immediate needs. Meanwhile, German bombers massed across the Channel, and the Luftwaffe prepared for an assault designed to break British resistance. In meetings late into the night, British leaders debated whether their defiance would inspire America or frighten it away. Some feared that a British collapse would convince Americans intervention was futile. Others believed only courage could draw them in. Churchill chose the latter path. Delivering speeches meant as much for Washington as for London. Words carried by radio across oceans. He spoke of civilization, shared values, and a long fight ahead, carefully framing Britain as America's first line of defense. Still the fear lingered, unspoken but heavy. that speeches alone might not overcome American caution or domestic politics. As summer deepened and air raid sirens became routine, Britain's leaders prepared for battle, unsure if help would ever come. The waiting continued, tense and unforgiving, shaping every choice and every sacrifice yet to follow. On 1 July 1940, the skies over southern England grew crowded, and British leaders sensed the storm about to break. Radar stations along the coast reported increasing German probes, while fighter squadrons scrambled daily, testing nerves and machines. Inside Downing Street, Churchill paced between briefings, outwardly defiant, inwardly calculating how long Britain could stand alone. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding warned bluntly that losses could not be replaced quickly, especially without American aircraft production. In Washington, British envoys pressed harder, sending urgent memos describing Britain's peril and the stakes for the world. Roosevelt responded with warmth, but restraint, promising aid short of war, while watching Congress like a weather vane. When Churchill learned of this, he was grateful but uneasy, knowing supplies were lifelines, not salvation. Within the War Cabinet, frustration simmered, as some ministers questioned whether American caution reflected deeper indifference. Privately, Churchill dismissed that notion, insisting America's soul was awakening. Though evidence remained painfully thin, he told colleagues that Britain must become an example, fighting not because victory was assured, but because surrender was unthinkable. As the Luftwaffe escalated attacks on airfields, losses mounted daily, and every pilot became irreplaceable. Churchill wrote personal messages to Roosevelt, carefully balancing desperation with dignity, pleading without appearing weak. He spoke of shared language, shared laws, and a shared destiny, framing Britain's survival as America's future security. British newspapers echoed this message, publishing editorials aimed squarely at American readers across the Atlantic. Yet isolationist voices in the United States remained loud, accusing Britain of dragging others into its imperial war. This uncertainty gnawed at British leaders, because morale at home depended partly on hope from abroad. Each night, as bombs fell closer to London, ministers wondered whether their stand would inspire action, or be remembered as tragic defiance. The battle in the air was becoming a test not only of Britain's strength, but of America's conscience. By 15 August 1940, the Battle of Britain reached its violent peak, and the cost was felt in every briefing room. German raids came in waves, testing radar, pilots, and nerves, while smoke columns marked airfields across the South. Churchill met his commanders daily, studying casualty lists, knowing each name represented a dwindling margin of survival. Privately, he admitted that without outside help, Britain's strength was finite. Courage alone could not build aircraft. American newspapers began publishing photographs of burning London and battered RAF pilots, stirring sympathy among readers. British leaders followed this coverage closely, understanding public emotion could move politicians where logic failed. Lord Beaverbrook pressed for faster aircraft production, warning that attrition favored Germany, especially without American factories. In Washington, Roosevelt faced growing pressure, as polls shifted slowly toward aiding Britain. Though war remained unpopular, Churchill sensed the shift, cautiously optimistic, yet wary of disappointment. After months of waiting, when Roosevelt approved the destroyers for bases deal, Churchill called it a lifeline, not a turning point. British ministers debated its meaning, some seeing it as proof America would never fully commit, others as a first crack in isolationism. Churchill leaned toward the latter, believing momentum mattered more than immediacy. He spoke publicly of gratitude, while privately urging aides to extract more ships, planes, and credit. The Luftwaffe shifted targets toward cities, unleashing terror on civilians, hoping to break morale. British leaders watched London burn, convinced that surrender would erase not only lives, but the future. They told one another that if America never came, Britain must still fight, for history would judge their resolve. Yet in quiet moments, exhaustion showed. And the question returned, how long could they endure alone? As autumn approached, the battle's outcome remained uncertain, hanging on weather, pilots, and distant decisions in Washington. On 3 September 1940, exactly 1 year since Britain declared war, the mood in London was somber and reflective. Churchill stood before Parliament, acknowledging sacrifice, while privately measuring survival in weeks, not months. The Blitz had begun in earnest. Night after night of firestorms, turning neighborhoods into ruins, and civilians into targets. British leaders toured bombed streets at dawn, offering reassurance, while absorbing the scale of destruction firsthand. Inside shelters, ordinary citizens listened for engines overhead, embodying the endurance their leaders demanded. Churchill believed these scenes mattered across the Atlantic, shaping American perceptions of Britain's resolve. He instructed information officers to emphasize civilian courage, framing Britain as a nation worth saving. Meanwhile in Washington, Roosevelt edged closer to commitment, approving expanded Lend-Lease discussions. Though war remained distant, British diplomats reported cautious optimism, noting shifts in language and tone among American officials. Yet isolationists still warned that Britain was finished, and American aid would be wasted. This narrative alarmed British leaders, because if America believed Britain doomed, support could evaporate overnight. Churchill responded with speeches that blended defiance and vulnerability, carefully calibrated for American ears. He spoke of long nights and unbroken will, while never admitting how close defeat sometimes felt. Within the war cabinet, debates grew sharper as resources thinned and pressure mounted. Some ministers questioned whether continued resistance justified the cost. If America delayed indefinitely, Churchill rejected such doubts fiercely, arguing that survival itself was a form of persuasion. Every night endured, every raid survived, increased the odds that America would eventually choose a side. As autumn deepened, Britain fought on, suspended between devastation and hope, waiting for a decision beyond its control. By 11 March 1941, the waiting ended partially, though uncertainty still hung thick in the air. President Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Act, unlocking American industry for Britain's survival, and shifting the balance subtly. Churchill received the news in the cabinet war rooms, allowing himself a rare moment of visible relief. He told colleagues that this was not alliance, but partnership, a bridge across the Atlantic built under fire. British leaders understood the limits. America would supply, but not yet fight. And Britain still stood alone in battle. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking lifelines faster than replacements arrived, turning supply routes into killing fields. Admirals warned that without American naval involvement, losses could become catastrophic. Churchill wrote again to Roosevelt, stressing urgency and shared danger, while avoiding demands for troops. He framed Britain as a shield, absorbing blows meant for others, buying time with blood. Within the war cabinet, confidence grew cautiously, though exhaustion never faded. Ministers acknowledged that American aid validated their defiance, proving resistance had not been futile. Yet fear lingered, because aid could stop as easily as it began. Under political pressure, British leaders debated how far to rely on American promises versus preparing for isolation once more. Publicly they celebrated Lend-Lease as proof of shared destiny, while privately planning for worst-case scenarios. The Luftwaffe had been blunted, but the war expanded elsewhere, dragging resources thin. Churchill warned Parliament that this was a long war, and victory remained distant. Still, for the first time since 10 May 1940, Britain no longer felt completely alone. The question shifted from whether America would help to whether help would arrive in time. On 7 December 1941, the news reached London in the early hours, cutting through exhaustion like a blade. Japanese aircraft had attacked Pearl Harbor, and suddenly the war widened beyond all previous boundaries. Churchill was dining at Chequers when the message arrived. and those present saw his shoulders ease for the first time in months. He later wrote that being in the same war as America meant the end of all doubts and most fears. British leaders gathered urgently, not in panic, but in grim recognition of what this moment meant. The United States would enter the war fully, not as supplier, but as combatant, altering every calculation. Churchill addressed the nation days later, voice steady, declaring that Britain was no longer alone in its struggle. Privately, ministers reflected on how close Britain had come to defeat. Before this turning of the tide, they remembered the months of silence, hesitation, and conditional support, when survival hung by threads. Churchill sent a message to Roosevelt, brief and emotional, welcoming America as a brother in arms. In Washington, declarations followed swiftly. Germany and Italy soon declaring war on the United States. British leaders understood this escalation would lengthen the conflict, but also ensure its outcome. For the first time, long-term planning replaced desperate improvisation across strategy rooms and factories. Yet the human cost already paid weighed heavily, because this partnership arrived only after immense suffering. Churchill confided to aides that history would never know how narrow the margins had been. Britain's stand, made without certainty of American entry, had shaped the course of the war. As 1941 closed, Britain faced the future with allies, but never forgot the lonely year behind them. The fear that America might never come had driven every hard choice and left permanent scars. By 14 January 1942, Churchill crossed the Atlantic in winter seas, bound for Washington, no longer as a supplicant. He arrived carrying memories of isolation and sacrifice, determined to shape the alliance born of necessity. British leaders watched closely from London, knowing this meeting would define their place beside a vastly stronger partner. Churchill met Roosevelt face to face, speaking candidly about Britain's endurance and the year spent standing alone. He reminded American officials, gently but firmly, that Britain had fought when hope was uncertain. Behind closed doors, British advisors worried that America's industrial weight would overshadow Britain's voice. They feared that decisions might now be made in Washington, with London reduced to a junior role. Churchill pushed back against this fate, insisting on shared strategy, shared command, and mutual respect. He spoke of lessons learned in isolation, of hard choices made without guarantees. American generals listened, impressed by Britain's survival, yet eager to assert their own priorities. The war councils were tense, filled with maps, arguments, and competing visions of how to defeat Germany. British leaders argued for Europe first, remembering how close collapse had come without American help. They warned against distraction, stressing that Germany remained the central threat. Churchill's urgency was shaped by memory, by nights when Britain waited alone for decisions made elsewhere. In London, ministers followed reports anxiously, aware that alliance did not erase imbalance. They debated how to preserve influence, while welcoming strength that could finally end the war. Churchill wrote home that partnership was essential, but equality must be defended. He knew Britain's moral authority came from having stood when America could not. As winter meetings continued, Britain's future shifted again, this time toward cooperation rather than survival. Yet beneath optimism lay caution, because British leaders never forgot how long help had taken to arrive. The alliance was real now, but trust had been earned slowly, through fire and endurance. On 20 August 1943, British leaders gathered in Quebec, far from bombed streets, but still shaped by memory. The war had turned, yet decisions made here would determine how, and how fast, it would end. Churchill arrived conscious of Britain's changed position. No longer alone, yet no longer dominant. Across the table sat American generals, confident, well-supplied, and focused on decisive action. In private conversations, British officials recalled 1940, when Britain begged for aid, and America hesitated. Those memories fueled quiet determination to influence strategy, not be sidelined by sheer American power. Churchill argued for caution, shaped by years of attrition and the cost of premature assaults. American leaders pushed for bold moves, confident in industrial strength and manpower. The tension was polite but real, reflecting different wartime journeys. British leaders believed experience earned authority, even if resources no longer matched America's. Churchill reminded Roosevelt that Britain's early stand had bought time, allowing American mobilization. He did so subtly, aware that alliance required diplomacy, not grievance. Behind closed doors, British planners feared being rushed into operations driven by American timelines. They remembered what it meant to fight without reserves, when mistakes could be fatal. These conferences were haunted by the past, by the months when Britain faced annihilation alone. British leaders spoke with the voice of survival, shaped by nights of bombing and uncertainty. Though victory seemed inevitable now, they knew how fragile history could be. Every argument carried echoes of that earlier fear, that Britain's fate once depended on distant choices. As plans solidified, British leaders accepted their reduced role. While guarding hard-won influence, the alliance moved forward, powerful but uneven, forged by shared war and unequal beginnings. By 8 May 1945, the guns fell silent in Europe, and Britain emerged victorious but permanently changed. Crowds filled London streets, cheering relief more than triumph, carrying memories no celebration could erase. Churchill stood on the balcony at Whitehall, waving to the nation, aware that history had already begun judging him. Privately, he reflected on 1940, when victory seemed impossible, and America's silence felt like abandonment. British leaders gathered afterward, not in jubilation, but in quiet reckoning, recalling how close defeat had come. They spoke openly now, admitting fears once hidden, about standing alone against overwhelming power. Many confessed that without American entry, Britain's fate would likely have been sealed. Yet they also believed Britain's defiance had forced history's hand, shaping America's eventual choice. Churchill argued that Britain's lonely stand gave moral weight to the alliance that followed. He told colleagues that endurance itself had been a weapon, wielded in the absence of certainty. Across the Atlantic, America emerged as the dominant power, its late entry reshaping the world order. British leaders accepted this reality, knowing empire was fading, influence narrowing, and dependence growing. Still, they took pride in having held the line when no guarantees existed. They remembered the meetings, the doubts, the whispered questions about survival without America. Those months shaped British leadership forever, instilling caution, resilience, and a deep awareness of vulnerability. Post-war planning reflected this memory, prioritizing alliances over isolation, cooperation over pride. Churchill warned future generations never to assume help would arrive in time. He believed history rewarded preparation, not hope, and punished those who waited passively. The war ended with Britain allied, but scarred by solitude. What British leaders said in private, when America might never come, revealed their deepest fears. Those words were born of uncertainty and proved by endurance. Victory was shared in the end, but survival had once been solitary.